Thank you for joining us today on 10 Minutes with the Artist, an episodic series that explores the art practice and the personal vision that guides artists. On today's episode, we're very proud to have Kara Iliff, who is completing her thesis in architecture at North Dakota State University. We invited her here today to speak about her research and the creation of artifacts in preparation for her defense. Kara's work examines the convergence of nature and industrialization through an exploration of cleansing fresh water. Her installation combines individual pieces of paper that mimic the movement, sound, feel, and complexity of water. Her work is a monument to the shell of a system that is powerful and necessary on one hand, and delicate and imperiled on the other. I'm Anthony Ferris, and this is 10 Minutes with the Artist. Kara, thank you for joining us today on 10 Minutes with the Artist. Even though the installation is static, I was wondering if it implies some sort of movement, motion, or some sort of sense of interaction.
I would definitely say so, yeah. Just between the interactions of the pieces of paper, even though, as you said, they are static, there's this kind of complexity to them that gives them this movement. And then there's also the audio component of the artifact as well, in which the pieces of paper were moved back and forth in a wave form. And the audio from that is kind of indicates a movement as well, even though it's not a physical presence in the room. It implies that as well.
And did the work change at all between sort of its development and its installation in the gallery?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, the artifact process in itself is kind of creating all these different iterations of your ideas. And then even with the final installation in the gallery, originally the papers were kind of arranged in a square format, but to accommodate for the gallery space, they were moved into more of an organic form where they kind of interacted with the architecture of the gallery too. The organic shape, it almost feels like water. Does it speak to water, or does it speak to the absence of water? Well, going back to the architecture I'm trying to create through this artifact, I'm trying to create a research and conservation center for freshwater. And the artifact kind of serves as a warning to our current treatment of freshwater, in that if we don't continue to take consideration of its the current quality of our fresh water, it could speak to a future without it. And so it's kind of speaking to the absence of water, and this hollowness of the future without it, and the presence that water leaves even when it's the presence it leaves these areas that it's touched so deeply.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the number? So you have thousands of pieces of paper, and how that sort of impacts the way that a viewer may look at it as a whole versus them being specifically individual pieces, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the significance of water is just the scales at which we experience it, from the smallest drop, like our day-to-day interactions with it, versus a body of water, which is something that's kind of something that we covet, and it's something we naturally gravitate towards. And so in the creation of the artifact, it started as just kind of playing around with these little pieces of paper and how they would act individually when they're interacting with water, and then they just kind of accumulated into a larger body.
There's something really gorgeous about, I think you call it the finger, the
fingerprint?
The fingerprint, yes, of the water.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that kind of alludes back to the presence of water in its absence, and just how you can tell you get the sense of water in the artifact, even though there is no water present, but you can tell that it's touched the papers, and just how each paper kind of took on its own form based on the water it's been in contact with.
Why is sound connected at all with water?
Well, we don't experience water with just one sense. We touch it, and we can hear it, and we can, with salt water, we can smell it. It's kind of an all-encompassing presence. And so I wanted to kind of interact, or have people interact with it on more than just with one sense. And so kind of bringing audio into the artifact, it kind of created a more all-encompassing experience, and it kind of set this tone of, being near a body of water, but still kind of missing its absence too.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think you do that through walking through it and having that like physical connection with an object, speaking to the sound of water when it's not actually there, which I think is kind of funny that there's an imitation of it. So at the very end of our conversation, we like to ask a few questions about your creative practice. So I was curious at what time of day you feel like you're most creative.
I think I work best is probably evening times. Usually 7, 8 o'clock is kind of when I hit like my second wind for the day.
Okay.
That's usually when I'm at studio. Just kind of working away that's usually when I'm kind of the most productive, I suppose.
Yeah. And do you feel like do you listen to music or anything like that while you're making work?
I do, yep. Depends on what I'm working on, but usually if I'm at my computer or just doing something kind of not mindless but repetitive, I'll throw on some music.
What do you listen to?
Oh, I've been listening to a lot of stuff recently. I think Bastille has been one of my favorites. Cinematic Orchestra. And then, oddly enough, I've been listening to Kanye West recently, too.
Okay. Is there anything that you're reading right now?
I guess so. As far as reading outside of school, I do like to keep a few books laying around that I'll pick up and read for a bit. And I think I've been working through The Martian recently.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And how do you know that you're finished with a piece?
I almost never know when I'm finished with the piece. It's usually dictated by the deadline.
Okay.
I always feel like even if it's through art or architecture, I feel like there's always more to be done. And I've always, since I've been young, I've been kind of artistically inclined, and there's always been that feeling of like, well, you could always do more and keep working. But so I would say that it never feels completely finished because you kind of see this potential in your work and all the different directions it could go. So it's just a matter of knowing when to stop.
Yeah.
So.
And what do you feel like was the most challenging thing about working in the medium that you are?
You mean through the artifact or in architecture? Well, I think the biggest challenge I had was kind of trying to maintain the simplicity, which kind of, paper does on its own. But it was a matter of not overdoing it. I went through a lot of iterations in my artifact as far as how to get the papers to move to create the audio, and then just kind of leaving it, kind of coming to the conclusion to just leave it on the ground and let it be as it is. So I think maintaining the simplicity in what I'm trying to do was one of the biggest challenges.
And were there any other mediums that you were working with before that, like if you had to work in a different medium, what do you think that you would have worked in?
Well, through some of the earlier iterations, I worked with little planes of acrylic, similar to the piece of paper. I've worked with plaster a bit. So, yeah, just other simplistic materials, I suppose. But I was really a fan of working in plaster. I think it did quite a bit for my project.
Yeah. And then I guess my last question for you would be, what's next?
Well, I suppose it'd be translating these ideas from my artifact into the architecture and kind of really evoking this experience of the artifact into the architecture.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much for joining us, and I'd like to thank you all for your time and your interest in the professional practice and the creative explorations happening here at North Dakota State University. So thank you, and for everyone here at the Memorial Union Gallery, keep creative.